In a time as turbulent as today's world, people are finding it harder and harder to see eye to eye on topics, and people are even losing friendships over disagreements that, in the grand scheme of things, undermine every other trait of said friendships that made them so special. Now, I think everyone watching this video is guilty of defending something they didn't fully understand. I mean, I know I have at least. And I think, at least for me, it was out of fear of being proven wrong and looking stupid in front of my friends. But I think if people could just hear each other out and possibly even learn something from one of their peers, the world would be far less divided than it currently is. That is, I do think people are opening up their minds and engaging in higher level discussions that aren't about winning the argument, but are about expanding each other's knowledge and reaching a mutual compromise. I attribute this success in large part to Joe Rogan and his #1 podcast in the world. And I think after you watch the rest of this video, you will realize just how monumental Joe Rogan's influence truly is on communities and a society as a whole. Ever since the first presidential debates were held live on television in the 60s, the media has had a near monopoly on the political landscape. They have been so powerful, in fact, that they pretty much get to decide at least roughly who the president will be, as they control who gets to be on the debate stage. And newsflash, if you're not a Republican or Democrat, good luck with that. Not only do they get to choose which group of people have a chance at winning, but they greatly inflate the odds of a single candidate to win as well, by spending absurd amounts of money on the candidate they want to win. This kind of control over any industry is alarming itself. But it's especially alarming when you realize it's the same government that is supposed to protect us that is being, at the very least, largely influenced by other forces that are not voters. Luckily for people, the internet came along, which decentralized information for anybody with an electronic device. Unluckily for people, the media has in large part monopolized the internet, which makes pushing their narrative easier than ever before. In saying that, there are still many creators making their own content and sharing their views on stuff. It's just hard to find them because legacy media companies spend billions advertising their content, which pushes out smaller creators. As we're about to see in the next section though, Joe Rogan breaks the status quo, and it's probably crazier than you may even think. Joe Rogan might be the king of podcasting right now, but he was actually known for numerous things before he even started podcasting. Probably most well known of those was his career in hosting Fear Factor, where for over 150 episodes, he would facilitate the massively popular show. But he was also known for other stuff, like martial arts and being a comedian, which he still does to this day. All these experiences gave Joe the unique opportunity to network with many different types of people in many different types of circumstances. This would give Joe the greatest gift he could ask for, and that would be his people skills and his ability to have a seemingly meaningful conversation with anybody he met, regardless of their personality. The gift would take full form when in the winter of 2009, he would start the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, which would launch him into vast fame and wealth, and give him the opportunity to sit down and talk with some of the most interesting people in the world, like Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, and Bob Lazar. And the best part about all of this is that Joe won't come into the podcast trying to get a specific narrative out of his guest, but will instead come into the podcast after reading maybe a book they wrote or an interview they gave, starting with a loose structure and then letting the conversation take full shape of its own. This is how he was able to gain more viewership than legacy media. With this formula, it would allow his viewers to watch an objective look on their favorite or least favorite people in the world. So in the end, it looks like people can get a mostly unbiased view of the world from the Joe Rogan podcast. And while true to some extent, it wasn't without controversy. And if you think legacy media would do nothing about it, you would unfortunately be greatly mistaken, as they would and still do everything in their power to paint Joe Rogan in the worst way possible. When you're as popular as Joe Rogan, you can't please everybody. It's just impossible. But upsetting certain groups of people can be far more detrimental than other groups. And Joe Rogan has made quite some enemies in the groups you don't want to upset. mainly being the mainstream media. While Joe Rogan has never been a stranger to criticism, recently he's been facing more backlash than he ever has before in his career, mainly because of his decision to not get vaccinated. For example, in December of 2021, Joe Rogan had one of the founders of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine on his podcast, that being Dr. Robert Malone. The reason it was so controversial is that the doctor was hesitant to some parts of the vaccine and said stuff like, well, actually, I'll just show you.
Pfizer is one of the most criminal pharmaceutical organizations in the world based on their past legal history.
Another example of Joe Rogan getting caught in controversy was when videos of him saying the N-word resurfaced and spread like wildfire all throughout the internet. For most people, they couldn't handle the stress of a huge swarm of people coming to leave hateful comments on one of their social media posts. But one of Joe Rogan's best characteristics is his integrity, and his ability to not fold to a narrative. This single characteristic about him is why he is so unbiased and objective as he currently is. And it is ultimately what makes him so dangerous to legacy media. This is because whatever they throw at him will have little to no effect, and most of the time, he will just gain more popularity, whereas legacy media's viewership is dwindling. And it's a trend that's only ramped up in the last couple years. They know if people that are creating content for free like Joe Rogan are able to gain a bigger audience than themselves, then people won't be as easily fooled by legacy media's biases. And the overall power legacy media holds over the US political system will crumble. For the past decades, it has been normal for big media corporations to hold vast power over just about everything. But that's why the Joe Rogan podcast is as monumental as it is. Once you start to decentralize the power from biased media companies to independent creators, you produce a much more free-flowing society that doesn't just have to agree with everything their community says, and can have some values that might not fully align with their peers and still be respected by them. Because at the end of the day, humans are very complex creatures that can't be fully put into one group, as their views and values can vary a lot. To end off this video, I will say this. For now, Joe Rogan is just an anomaly in the system. But it is my hope and prediction that give it a couple decades, and content like the Joe Rogan podcast won't be the exception, but the normal way of consuming media.